Hey everybody, I am Connie Buna,
And I'm Roland Kim.
and this is the Launch, Grow, Harvest podcast.
Welcome.
Partner, I'm excited to talk to you today.
Long overdue.
Long overdue. I'd love to talk with you a little bit more about generally the art of building a business, and let's say maybe the arc of what that business looks like. When do you grow? When do you let go? And everything in between. All those good bits.
So, what are we? A couple decades into building a few businesses now.
Yes.
Definitely noticing that there's a lot of similarities and distinct stages that they all go through. And I think also really self-recognizing what you're good at and what you like to do. What has been your favorite business in the last decade that you've been cultivating?
So it's been a very interesting experience for me because there's also been such a profound identity shift where historically I told myself that I wasn't a business person.
Yep.
And I believed that story. And so I would say probably for the first 5, 6, 7 years of my real estate practice, I looked at myself more as a salesperson as opposed to a business person. And I think that being involved in the brokerage, opening a startup, and all of the highs and lows that came with that has really been a profound learning experience for me, an amazing learning experience. And I think I come away from that experience now with a very different perspective on my own identity as a business person. And I would say certainly now I would identify as proudly as a business person. And it is such an interesting idea because you could be a barber, you could be a taxi driver, you could be a baker, and all of those folks could also be business people. And so it really is something that I think perhaps the experience of it can be very fundamentally impacted by your own perception of your role in that world.
Where was, like for me, a point where obviously, like I said, a barber that's sitting in a barber chair and has a small location, that's a business person, right? And that level of business I always understood. I could see how to build that and manage it and the customer service. What was an interesting transition for me is the tipping point where you go into building something that's beyond what you can accomplish yourself, right? Where you're at a stage where you have more staff than if they got sick that you could complete their work. And so that's a very interesting stage that we went through with the brokerage business where it grew quite well and effectively went to a place where, wow, we have a big business. And I know for myself that was an exciting stage. That was also where I started having to go outside of my natural wheelhouse, and I found that stage to be a lot more skill needed to evolve and learn that.
Yeah.
Whereas the early stages of conceptually coming up with an idea and doing all the work that one human could physically do to launch and do a task, do a business, that I'm very comfortable with. And so it was an awesome experience over the last decade growing the brokerage that we did and then successfully selling it. It also showed me that I'm not meant to be a CEO of a company with hundreds of employees. That's not my joy. Where for other people, I think their joy might not be still doing the hands-on work, which I enjoy.
Yes. So it makes me think, as you're saying those things, it makes me think about the various stages of growth. We have that sort of startup phase, that entry level of your business.
The launch.
Even prior to the launch, you were talking about the conceptual build out. And I think one of the learning pieces is I don't think I gave enough thought to, or I think in future I will give more thought to, what does the business look like in 5 years?
Yeah.
What does it look like in 10 years? What's my role in that business? And so that's something now that I'm actually spending quite a bit of time in my real estate practice, giving a lot of thought to, because I think that we would both agree that in our current stage of our real estate practices, we're definitely at a well beyond a sole proprietor sort of process and volume, let's say. And so if the staff all went away tomorrow, we would be very challenged to do it all. We frankly couldn't do it all. And that reminds me of, again, when you're future planning, thinking through what that looks like so that at day one, your bench building, your planning, your anticipating succession planning, and all of these other details that, again, in my naivety of getting into the business of the brokerage at the early days, and certainly in my real estate practice, I didn't even think about growth in that way. I really only regarded it just as my own sole proprietor work. But it really does think about, do you want to manage people? Is that something that you want? Because if your goals are such that you are absolutely going to need a staff, then you really need to get comfortable, and frankly, you need to enjoy working and managing people.
No, and you bring up a really good point, right? Because I think for many years, if you take the real estate role, people just assumed once we get to a certain point in your production, you're going to hire a full-time assistant and start managing staff and go from there. Challenge in that perhaps in the last decade or decade and a half is it's gotten much harder to find that staff person that just jumps on board. And a lot of what we've discovered, a lot of realtors aren't natural good leaders, right? And so they spin a lot of wheels where they're not getting what they want out of that relationship, out of the employee, and it might detract them from actually doing the business.
Yes.
And the good part now is there's solutions to everything. So there's companies out there that can do admin work for you. So a business owner that really, their sweet spot is being the sole proprietor and the operator and the doer. They just want to buy some more time back. There's ways of doing that now without building a business that doesn't fit your style. And you touched on an earlier, partner, where you're like, now that you're taking a step to work on your business to figure out where you want to see it in 5 and 10 years, I think, and I don't want to speak for you, but for myself, we have the permission to really be honest with what we like.
Yes.
Right? And say, I want more of that kind of business with that kind of person in that kind of setting. And so how do I perhaps cut things out that we don't need, or find people to do the certain things that are still needed in order to get there?
Yes.
And that's a pretty neat space to be. I think a lot of people, again, we've spoken about it before, really undervalue thinking time and working on your business versus just doing.
Yes.
So it's pretty cool because we're nearly 2 decades into real estate, and yet I don't feel we're at the coasting stage yet. And
I wonder when that will come.
but it doesn't feel harder, right?
Yes.
It's certainly, I wouldn't say that much easier, but it's getting more enjoyable, I find, when you know what you're working on.
Yes. And I've been thinking a lot about, as it relates to just the idea of business building and growth, how does that align with your bigger vision for your life? Are you building businesses because that's something that really lights you up and excites you? Are you building businesses because you are looking for other ways to generate revenue? That's typically one of the driving forces for most business people. When you're thinking about building those businesses, the other thing that comes to mind too is, what business really does have a coasting mechanism? At what stage are you realistically foot off the gas, you're fully in cruise control? Where do you think that comes in?
I think it's less and less that it's automatically going to be in every business. I believe decades ago, even if you had a competitive sales business like ourselves, it was easier than it is now to build a moat around it, where if you gave 20 years of great service, your clients didn't move cities as much as they do for us, where they leave the province or they migrate more. And so you have a lot more of a concentrated past client support network that in turn protects you as a realtor. People know, right? Where now I find the market is much more liquid for a sales role, and it's much harder to be top 1%, take your foot off the gas and remain there for a while.
Absolutely. One of the things that I've seen in our time in real estate is the growth of real estate business models of really large teams. We certainly see that in the Keller Williams realm. It's very prevalent in EXP, and many other brands have this model where you have a team leaders and then a number of other agents below you. And something that I've found interesting just to observe that, because I think our team compared to that is quite small scale and run very differently. But the interesting piece to that is seeing how that flows over time. Do those team leaders need to come back into direct production, for example? It does seem to me like that is the case, as an outside observer. And I wonder, is that just a system failure? Has the team not created the right systems so that it's flowing and the lead generation continues to happen and the high level of service that the client has come to expect that is associated with that brand remains. What are your thoughts on that?
I think there's a few points there. So if we talk about business in general, I think a lot of people fall into business and they're not clear themselves on where we wanted to take it. But if you never take a step back to actually figure out what do you like about it, what do you want more of, and what do you want to let go of, the business is running you. And if you're lucky, the business could keep growing, but life can pass you by and you might say, I would have liked to have gone in a different path. And I see that in real estate, like you said, if the last decade that we've been actively with Keller Williams in leadership and ownership, we've come across people who 10 years ago were a little bit ahead of us with maybe one or two brokerages, and they just really, I don't know if they consciously did it, but they went really heavy into growth. So they expanded, they completely went out of production, and some of them went to a certain level that success was exponential. And many I found over the last decade kind of came back to being more independent. And I think they realized that it's a lot of work running and steering many ships. And so I think a lot of those leaders came back to production if that was their enjoyment, or they realized they actually made more money in production with a smaller team because the costs were so high.
Yes.
So with real estate, I think it is definitely a business that can work at every different type of level, and it can also trick you into wanting to grow because we've been told that's the thing to do.
Yes.
And so there's a lot of people that start teams only to realize, you know what, I don't like it. I just want to be a very successful, client-oriented realtor that buys some help when I need help, but does 90% of the work myself. And we can certainly say from our experience, many of those setups make most of the profit, make a lot more profit sometimes than larger teams.
Yes, and you touch on something really important there that I think is also a factor that's often certainly overlooked, I think, quite a bit by sole proprietors, which is the profit number, right? We can get very caught up, I think, in the gross revenue number, and also certainly when you're running everything on your own, it is easy to allow expenses to sort of slip through your fingers, or not. Maybe you're not paying as close attention to that, and so at the end of the day, that's something I think that is an important piece to be looking at when we're thinking about business growth, and especially when I think about, again, the arc of the business and potentially the period of time where you say, okay, is this, when you do a full-on cost-benefit analysis and say, is this worth continuing to pour into, or is this time to say, now I'm ready to do something different?
Definitely, it kind of comes to that statement that the majority of millionaires in the U.S. made under $100,000 over the last century, or the last many decades, but that might change in the future.
This is annual earnings?
And so it really comes back to most successful millionaires, it's made on what you save and how you apply it. And so I do think a lot of business owners are looking at the wrong numbers.
Yes.
And at different stages of the arc, as you mentioned, you can get tricked into thinking you're winning and you're losing so slowly that you still think you're winning. And really, again, the biggest takeaway for me over the last many years is spending more time in reflection and conversation, and really working on your business. At the same time, being aware you still have to do heavy lifting. I've seen so many people that go to all the training events, do coaching, try and somehow remove work out of their role and try and mastermind to success. And that is definitely not something where I've seen work. And so the people that really inspire us are the ones that continue to evolve and through self-selection and self-opportunity have grown certain things. And some people, some of the greatest decisions I've seen is where people take a step back or pivot in a different direction.
Absolutely, and it makes me think even of our own trajectory of, I think, us having a really honest conversation with one another about what we want to continue to pour into. So many elements of this brokerage business were phenomenal for our personal growth, for our professional growth, for our relationships. We have been in business with some of the most amazing humans I could ever imagine, and what a gift to be able to work alongside them and provide them with gainful employment for the better part of a decade, and have a successful transition that allowed them to sustain and maintain their roles. I'm really proud of that piece for us. and also really excited about where the future is, the opportunity for us in terms of focusing on different businesses. I know for myself, reigniting a spark of excitement in my real estate practice feels really wonderful. It's certainly the start of this new year has felt very different.
Okay.
I've also come at this new year with quite a bit more experience and a lot more time to focus. And so it's been a very interesting dynamic.
Of applying it in a difficult year. Yeah, it's very good.
Any other closing thoughts?
No, I think another episode in the future is talking about where the opportunities lie in almost like side hustles or unique ways of growing a business that might not take over your career, not become your job.
That's a good one.
Yeah.
Let's set a nugget and talk about it next.
Thanks, partner.
As always, thanks so much for listening. We are Connie, Buna, and Roland Kim. You can find us at Launch, Grow, Harvest. You can find us at kimbuna.com. We are residential realtors in Vancouver and the greater Vancouver area. Thanks for listening.